So as far as I'm concerned, one of my personal mantras in life has always been Rahim Allahu man ahda ilayya uyubi. This is the key question that we ask ourselves. Can this evidence survive in Allah's court? And will this be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Then in the rest of the non-certain matters, we can agree to disagree, as I said, without being disagreeable. I always have this consciousness, this yaqeen, this certainty that I will be made to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will be held accountable for my beliefs, for my actions, for everything that I preach and promote. The definition of taqiyya that is accepted by both Shias and Sunnis, in order to accuse us of taqiyya, he invents his own imaginary definition of taqiyya in his mind.
And no, they believe that the Prophet does taqiyya. No, they believe Allah does taqiyya.
This whole lecture is critiques against reformers and reformists and al-Islaah. But has he laid out his methodology in full before embarking on this lecture? No, he hasn't. The interesting thing that I found recently is that even our methodology, mashallah, has been laid out so clearly that even non-serious and amateur polemicists like Bayatul Ghadir were able to locate the lectures in which we have revealed our methodology. As I said, our methodology is strict where we fear questioning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we fear that our evidence will be scrutinized. Who are these people that he's talking about and who he's trying to refute by saying, no, sects are there, sects are a ground reality? We are not saying that there isn't all of this in the Sunnah. We are saying there shouldn't be according to the Quran. And we are right in this. This is given in the Quran. And once you adopt this, sectarianism is already in the dustbin. You know why? Because now everyone is my brother. We are all brothers if we follow the simple formula of the Quran. And we will warn them about it, no problem. But we don't break brotherhood over historical matters. Ya akhi, it does not make sense. This is a big critical mistake that he made in this lecture, whereby he ended up lumping two very separate, distinct and disparate intellectual trends into one category of reform. These people want to reinvent a new deen that will be in line with modern, liberal, secular values. So they want to invent a new deen. They don't want to reform the deviations from the original deen. This is another key flaw in the lecture, is that after lumping us all into the same category, he then proceeds to pass collective judgments about us as if we are all one and the same. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد. My respected elders, my dearest youngsters, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It was recently brought to our attention that our beloved, respected and dearest Shaykh Ali Karmali delivered a lecture entitled Reform and Its Conditions, which was broadcast from his official channel and in which he tried to raise what he called some academic concerns and criticisms against reformers and reformist movements in general, and the Al-Islaah platform and myself in particular. Before I get down to responding to the points that he raised in detail, I would like to start by issuing some preliminary remarks of my own. The first of them being that I noticed the Shaykh was a bit uneasy and hesitant at the beginning of his lecture, and he was quite apprehensive and concerned about how his critiques would be received. And he seemed quite concerned and keen that they should not be taken the wrong way or in a negative sense. And this is why he proceeded to give assurances that he has nothing personal against anyone and that he doesn't mean to call anybody a deviant, but that his goal is merely to articulate some academic concerns. Now, for my part, I would like to assure the beloved Sheikh that none of what he said has been taken personally or in the wrong way or in a negative sense by any of us. And especially and particularly as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing that I took personally. And the reason for that is that all of this work that we're doing at Al-Islaah and this entire mission that we are involved in, this is all exclusively and sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for His pleasure, and for obtaining and securing najat and salvation and the best that we can for ourselves as well as our beloved communities worldwide. So there is no worldly motive or agenda associated with this work, as the Shaykh would very well know from his own experience. When you walk on this path, the only thing that you get from the public and from the communities is hatred. You get slander, you get character assassination, you get isolated, marginalized, and ostracized. You get deplatformed. Your name, character, and reputation is dragged through the mud. And this is why the only thing that makes this really excruciatingly difficult task worth it and worth our while is the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran about the hereafter. And the fact that He has obligated us, He has made it mandatory for us to discharge our duty of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, and He has promised us and given us assurances in lieu of that in the Quran. But because of what the kind of thorns that are put in your path when you walk on this path, we don't really recommend it for anyone who has worldly goals or worldly agendas in mind, because you will be disillusioned. If you're doing this for dunya, there is no dunya in this, right? So the only thing that can keep you motivated and keep you going is concern for the hereafter. And when your goal is sincerely the hereafter, and that's what you are striving towards, then you shouldn't mind people coming along the way and telling you where you could have gotten things wrong. Even if they happen to be wrong in this. It's just like if I'm driving my car and I'm headed to a certain location and someone knows that about me and they come to me, let's say they're in another car and they come to me and stop me and say, I think you're on the wrong track. Even if that person is wrong, this is no reason for me to get emotional or upset or lose my cool. The rational thing to do is to stop my car and say, okay, let's have a discussion. Let's see what kind of evidence you have. If he has a GPS or a map, or if he's willing to make a case, an evidence-based case for why I'm on the wrong track, let me hear him out, and then let me review and reevaluate my own bearings. And then we can either agree to agree, in which case I will introduce course correction, or we can agree to disagree. If I still feel no, I am on the right track, we can respectfully agree to disagree without being disagreeable. The unfortunate thing that we see in our communities, because of which our shuyukh have become so hesitant and apprehensive about advancing any kind of critique, is because our communities are so intolerant towards any kind of reform or talk about course correction, or because our communities get emotional and they get agitated and frustrated and they lash out. But our message to our communities is that if you're really serious for your hereafter, you shouldn't mind these kinds of attempts. So as far as I'm concerned, one of my personal mantras in life has always been رحم الله من أهدى إلي عيوبي, or أحب إخواني إلي من أهدى إلي عيوبي. May Allah have mercy on the one who guides me to my faults and defects. Or the most beloved of my companions is the one who points out my defects and my shortcomings and flaws for me so that I can improve. Criticism, when it's constructive, is the gateway to improvement and refinement and perfection. This particular statement, أحب إخواني إلي من أهدى إلي عيوبي, the most beloved of my companions is the one who highlights my mistakes for me and gifts me my shortcomings. This statement is actually a hadith in Al-Kafi, which Al-Kulayni attributes to with a chain to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And the statement رحم الله من أهدى إلي عيوبي is a statement that's also there in Sunni sources, and it's attributed to the second caliph. It's a good guiding principle for life, that one should always be willing and receptive to criticism and to calls for course correction. We welcome and embrace criticism when it comes to us from the traditional side. So when it comes to us from entities who are sympathetic to reform and supportive of it, like Sheikh, and from personalities who have spearheaded and done some reform work of their own as well, then that's all the more reason for us to be welcoming and appreciative of it. So our beloved Sheikh has nothing to fear yani on the personal level. This is not going to introduce any, yani, as they say in Arabic, لا يفسد للود قضية. These kinds of discussions and engagement, critical engagement, is definitely not something that should affect personal relationships or the brotherhood that we have together with each other. And this is what I believe in, and this is what I stand for.
But thank you very much for sharing again your insights. Wallahi, I personally am learning a lot also. And hopefully the other brothers and sisters are also learning, alhamdulillah. And inshallah, on the day of judgment, we can reply to Allah that we studied your Quran and we came with your Quran to you, and we're saying now, this is our proof, yeah? So thank you again for your time, and thank you everybody for your time. And may Allah bless you all, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Barakallahu feekum and jazakumullahu khairan, ya Sheikh, for hosting us and for your generous comments.
Thank you. Ahsant. Shukran.
I welcome all kinds of criticisms, even of the destructive variety. And if they're of the constructive variety, then even more so, we welcome them. But in as far as accepting them is concerned, then we have our standards. We have our usul, we have our mabani, and our biggest concern when we are deciding whether an evidence is acceptable to us or not, our biggest principle and our biggest concern is, will this evidence work in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after all the knowledge that He has given us from the Quran, from the Sunnah, from the transmissions of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, everything that we have, all things considered. If I base my position on this evidence, can I justify it in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Can I get away with it? Can this evidence withstand divine scrutiny? And so all of the conclusions that we have arrived at are based on this. This is the key question that we ask ourselves. Can this evidence survive in Allah's court? And will this be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Does the Quran give us any indication about this? Do we have anything from our sources that can help us at least have some kind of confidence, some kind of certainty that yes, this evidence is approved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and He would not hold it against us if we follow it? If you can make this case for us, you will always find yourself successful in convincing us. But if you present us evidence, arguments, proofs, which we look at them, we analyze them, and then we say, yeah, this would not work in my court. This would not work in the court of a seasoned or learned scholar. This would not work in the court of a lay person. Sometimes the arguments are so flimsy that even a lay person can take them apart. So then how do you expect us to accept an argument that cannot withstand human scrutiny? How do you expect us to adopt it and then take it for divine scrutiny and be willing to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment with it? So in any case, I hope one thing is very clear, that our mission at Islaah is not something we're doing for fun or entertainment. This is very serious work we are doing exclusively for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for the sake of our hereafter. The matters that we're trying to raise awareness about affect salvation in the hereafter in many instances. So this is not a matter of jest and play. It's not a matter of fun. These are very serious discussions, and if someone can really prove with valid evidence that we are actually wrong or mistaken about anything, and when I say valid evidence, I mean evidence that can work in Allah's court and that can pass muster by His standards, then I would be the first to submit to it. Ultimately, this is how I ended up where I am today, is that I had a lot of things, I had a lot of sectarian baggage, but when I presented it in front of the court of the Quran and the Islamic sources, whatever of it was able to withstand scrutiny, I kept on holding to it. But whatever of it was eroded and destroyed by the Quran and by the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, I let go of it because I understood that this will not help me, this will not profit me, this will not benefit me in the hereafter. So as I evaluate my own aqidah and my own deen, I always have this consciousness, this yaqeen, this certainty that I will be made to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will be held accountable for my beliefs, for my actions, for everything that I preach and promote. And the last thing that I want to happen to me on the Day of Judgment is for me to get stuck in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having believed in something that He considered to be falsehood, or having promoted anything that was not in keeping with His guidance, and having misguided others in the process. This is the worst case scenario. This is the nightmare that I have done everything possible to avoid. So if someone is willing to show me any critical mistakes or errors in my approach and methodology to the deen, or even in areas of history, or in any of the conclusions that I have arrived at regarding them, then I can only be deeply appreciative and welcoming of that. And if the evidence that I'm offered proving the case against me is such that I can see it to be so strong that it can hold up and withstand divine scrutiny, it can be acceptable in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's court, then I am the first to embrace such evidence. But even if that evidence is not up to that level, I still believe that even if the person who is trying to correct me, let's say if he's wrong, this is again no scope, this is again no grounds for me to be angry at them or to have resentment against them. It's just like, once again, let's say if I was traveling or preparing to travel to the United States of America for an important conference or meeting, for example, and I had obtained a visa, but let's say there was a problem in my visa. Let's say the travel agent that I decided to get it through deceived me and got me a fake one that is produced by, the forgerers and the fraudsters. Now, if someone came to me, if Sheikh came to me, or anyone else, even if a layperson came to me and said, Sayyidina, this visa of yours, the stamp on it is not genuine, it's not authentic, I would be actually grateful to that person, right, for their thoughtfulness. Even if it turns out upon deeper investigation that the person happened to be wrong, I would still be appreciative of the thoughtfulness and concern that the person had for me. So I would still not get angry or upset with this person, right? And this is what we want. This is the kind of spirit, and this is the kind of approach and attitude and mind frame that should be there in our communities. That whenever people try to tell you, okay, that something is wrong, whether it be at the level of aqidah, whether it be at the level of fiqh, whether it be at the level of readings in history, anyone comes and tells you, shares with you a different perspective, you should be receptive to it. You should not react in vicious and rude ways, as we normally witness in the toxic culture that's out there. And then you should have a two-pronged approach. If you find that the person who is calling you to correct your belief or your practice has provided you with valid evidence, then you should accept it. And if he has provided you with invalid evidence, you can respectfully reject it without breaking your brotherhood and without necessarily destroying your relations with that person. So long as they're holding on fast to at least the certainties of our faith, then in the rest of the non-certain matters, we can agree to disagree, as I said, without being disagreeable. Now, I would say that if the traditional camp in our communities, if they followed this approach, it would actually be so nice if, for example, even with the Shaykh himself, if they had followed the kind of approach that we are going to be following in this response, it would be so much better. Because the Shaykh in this particular lecture of his has raised many points against us that are completely flawed and technically unsound. In a few instances, he even inadvertently, I'm hoping, ended up making completely false and slanderous accusations against us. as we shall demonstrate, particularly in relation to taqiyya, when he accused us of attributing taqiyya to Allah and the Messenger, which is something that we are completely innocent of, and we do bara'ah from this position. It is inconceivable and impossible that we in our right minds would ever dare to attribute or ascribe taqiyya to Allah and His Messenger. But the Shaykh accuses us of this, and he tries to build a case by completely ignoring the definition of taqiyya that is accepted by both Shias and Sunnis. In order to accuse us of taqiyya, he invents his own imaginary definition of taqiyya in his mind. And then using that imaginary definition, he says that what we are attributing to Allah and the Messenger, which is actually a verse of the Quran in the case of Allah and a hadith of the Prophet, he says attributing this to Allah is you accusing Allah or you attributing taqiyya to Allah. And the definition that he's operating on is one that's accepted by nobody in this ummah. It's just something that he invented or that he thought up or imagined unconsciously in his mind.
So, he's doing taqiyya, yeah? Now I'll come and show you that Al-Islaah also do taqiyya. And no, they believe that the Prophet does taqiyya. No, they believe Allah does taqiyya. Wallahi, this is where you come and see that when you see these issues, they've written it themselves.
So he ended up making a slanderous and false accusation against us, but again, we forgive him for this. And we're going to show him how this is slanderous and how this is wrong. We will critique his arguments vigorously, but this is not going to cause us to break our brotherhood with him or to be upset with him or to have, wal-'iyadhu billah, any hatred or antagonism or animosity towards him. Or rather, we accept him as our brother in faith and our brother in Iman, and our love and our respect and our affection and even our admiration for him has not been reduced by any of this. So why can't all of us be like this when it comes to dealing with people who call for course correction or reform of any kind based on evidence from the Quran and the established guidance that's there in the Islamic sources? So that being said, I also wanted to raise some other points. As I said before, I respond to each and every critical point that Sheikh raised. I want to, I feel it's worthwhile and instructive to highlight for him some of our own academic concerns about his approach towards us, as we see it manifested in the critique he has tried to advance in the lecture that we are responding to. So one key point that I wanted to raise in the preliminary remarks itself is that Sheikh accused us of not having laid out our methodology. Okay, if you look at his lecture, I have the timestamp of minute 35, second 30, 35:30 to 37:08. Sheikh accuses us of not having laid out our methodology.
Any reform, for any research to be at par with academic standards, what needs to be explained is the methodology first and the terminologies used in that methodology.
But the reality is that he himself has not laid out his own methodology in the lecture that he gave, or in any other public lecture for that matter. So he proceeds to critique our work without revealing his own methodology in detail in that lecture. In fact, at certain points in the lecture, he defers his audience to future lectures that he plans on delivering to clarify his methodology. So what this shows us is that he himself unconsciously or subconsciously believes that it is possible and in fact permissible to criticize another person's ideas without fully laying out your own methodology, because that's what he's doing in this lecture. This whole lecture is critiques against reformers and reformists and al-Islaah. But has he laid out his methodology in full before embarking on this lecture? No, he hasn't. So even if his claim that we have not laid out our methodology were right, and it is not right, as I will demonstrate before you, but even if it were right, he would still have no grounds to hold that against us, since he himself hasn't laid out his entire methodology in any lecture so far. So if he can critique people's claims and arguments without fully laying out his own methodology at the outset, why and on what grounds does he expect other people to be different? So I am not saying that I don't have an issue with him critiquing us without laying out his methodology. I'm simply pointing out that him critiquing us without laying out his methodology shows that he believes it's permissible. He believes that it's okay, it's something that can be done, and he has in fact done this. So then why does he have a problem if, in his perception, a certain entity has not revealed their methodology? Then he shouldn't have a problem against them critiquing anything, because he himself is critiquing them without laying out his methodology.
Clarify your beliefs and your actions and your methodology. We study it fully, and then if we accept it, we all come.
So that's just the first point. The second point is that in as far as the accusation that Al-Islaah has not revealed its methodology, then I would say that this is a false one. Al-Islaah has revealed a lot about its methodology over the course of so many different episodes and lectures, especially if you go back to the very first series, Dispelling the Darkness of Ghulu with the Light of Quran. You will see that across these lectures, we explained our terminology, we explained our methodology, we gave so much insight into this. And so I'm surprised at how this accusation can be leveled against us. It seems that Shaykh has either not bothered to go through these lectures, or he has ignored them, or he has forgotten about them. Maybe because they were delivered a long time back. But this still does not exempt him from the obligation to at least go through all the content that we have put out there before beginning to critique it. Because if you don't have all our content in front of you, then you might end up accusing us of not covering things which we actually have covered in certain lectures, right? The interesting thing that I found recently is that even our methodology, mashallah, has been laid out so clearly that even non-serious and amateur polemicists like Bayatul Ghadir were able to locate the lectures in which we have revealed our methodology. As you can see from their latest video, which is the part 4 episode that they have done. If you look at the timestamp of 4 minute 42 seconds to 8 minute 7 seconds, they have actually taken the parts of our lectures in which we have revealed our methodology, and they have attempted to critique us against what we have said over there.
Anyways, additionally, the guy claims that they accept clear dalil, which according to him is something which is qat'iyya sudur, i.e. when something is certain or definitive knowledge in its attribution, and qat'iyya dalala, i.e. something with clear meaning in the content.
It's precisely because we have the mentality that, look, when clear dalil is presented, don't do takabbur in front of it. Don't try to cut corners and run here and there. No, surrender. When we see clear-cut dalil, which is qat'iyyun, suduran, wa dalalatan, aw dilalatan, we surrender and submit. We don't do takabbur and try to invent new meanings for words, or, try to create philosophical doubt and bring other shubuhat and this and that. No. If we were in that business, we would not be promoting the kind of reform that we're promoting today. So we are only promoting this reform because when we ourselves undertook this research, and we went through all these evidences, those evidences which were absolutely qat'i, suduran wa dilalatan, they were absolutely clear-cut, ironclad evidences, and they were going against things that we had previously been led to believe in. We gave up those things. We said, we don't care how many people support this or how popular it is. If the dalil and if the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in clear Arabic is telling us this is wrong, this cannot be approved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't care what the world says. Let the whole world testify it's true. We have to accept that it is false, because the dalil is falsifying it. And what the dalil is authenticating, even if the entire world calls it a lie, we continue to promote it as the truth, because قَدْ قَامَ الدَّلِيلُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. The dalil for it, the evidence and proof for it is valid.
In this next clip, he himself defines what he means by these terms, i.e. qat'iyya sudur and qat'iyya dalala.
So there are two kinds of sudur. You have qat'iyyu sudur, you have some evidences, like for example, the whole Quran is qat'iyyu sudur, meaning that it is 100% established to be from Allah. There is no doubt about it. That's why you don't even have to, if I quote to you a verse of the Quran, you don't have to go and ask the scholar and say, is this verse authentic? Can I know what's the sanad of this verse? No. The Quran it's mutawatir, so there is no question of sanad there. It's 100%. Allah has protected it and preserved it in such a way that there can be no doubt of its being from Him. And He has protected it at every level. So from Allah to Jibreel to the Prophet to the Ummah, at every stage, the transmission of the Quran, the sudur of the Quran has been protected through channels that give us absolute qat'i certainty that this is from Allah. So for example, when you're dealing with Quran, there is no bahth of sudur. The whole Quran is qat'i sudur. In the riwayat and in the narrations, not all ahadith are qat'i sudur. In fact, majority, close to 95-98% of the narrations that we have are zanni sudur, because they're all akhbar ahad. They are single chain narrations which the ulama say do not give a certainty that they are from Rasulullah. There's 50% chance they're from Rasulullah, 40%, 60%. The percentage may vary depending on the kind of narrators that exist in the chain. But at the end of the day, if you're dealing with a single chain transmission, that means one person heard from a second person, who heard from a third, from a fourth, and the chain is just an individual chain. It is not being narrated by entire groups of people all together at the same time who are transmitting it to another group, and this way to the whole ummah. If that is not there, then this transmission is zanni. It is a highly doubtful kind of transmission, and you cannot base all claims about ghaib on the basis of news or...
So, if Bay'atul Ghadir could find out about our methodology just by searching and going through our lectures, then what really surprises us is how Shaykh missed all of that. Now, the only issue with Bay'atul Ghadir is that they have tried to, so they have, they got our methodology for matters of deen, yani claims about Allah, claims about ghaib, claims about halal and haram, where we insist on having ilm or certainty yielding evidence that we can be sure is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They took this approach, this aspect of our methodology, and they tried to critique our reading of history and our historical positions with that qat'i methodology or with that ilm-based methodology. So that's their only mistake. Is that they're taking our approach and our methodology for deeni matters and they're applying it on readings of history. When in reality, we don't consider our readings of history to be part of our deen. Do you understand? So because this is not part of our deen, we don't have the same high standards for history. In history, you can even be, even if you're wrong, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not necessarily deprive you of salvation if your position in history was a safe one. It did not entail slander or it didn't entail lying against Allah and His Messenger or things like that. So, whereas in history, we have a much more relaxed approach. Even in akhlaqiyat, for example, in things of ethics and morality, we are not very strict in evaluating the chains, for example. We can accept weaker narrations, which we would not accept in aqidah, which we would not accept maybe in fiqh, but in akhlaqiyat, in basic things like, if a riwayah is saying you should be respectful to your parents, then we're not going to scrutinize it too much, because this is already asl in the Quran and it's an ethical matter. And this is not us, this approach is not unique to us. Generally, the ulama are like this. The ulama on both sides of the divide, on the Sunni side and on the Shia side, they are very relaxed when it comes to these lower level mabahith, such as akhlaqiyat and ethics and morality. Here they will accept narrations which are whose content is sound, even if their transmission is not that sound. So in any case, the mistake that Bay'atul Ghadir made was in application. They thought that our ilm-based methodology applies to buhuth and discussions of world history and even Islamic history, whereas in matters of Islamic history that are not things that we will be questioned about on the Day of Judgment, we do not have such strict standards, because as I said, our methodology is strict where we fear questioning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we fear that our evidence will be scrutinized. But in matters where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aslan has not regarded as part of the syllabus, then here we accept zanni evidence, provided it is plausible, provided it makes sense, and provided it agrees with the overall worldview of the Quran. So in any case, my point here is not to respond to Bayatul Ghadir. We will respond to them separately, inshallah ta'ala, when we get to that. But the point is to show that even Bayatul Ghadir, when they tried to search for our methodology, they at least managed to find our methodology that we have put out there for matters of deen. So it's now, of course, it's another thing that they misunderstood its application, but that's besides the point. The important thing is that they were able to find points in our lectures where we have revealed aspects of our methodology and even defined and explained the terminology that we have used. So that's just our first concern, that the accusation of not revealing and not clarifying the methodology is not in its place. It is misplaced as far as our humble opinion and perspective is concerned. The second concern that we had was this tendency that the Shaykh has to build straw man claims and then refute them. So over here, if you look at the transcript, he makes a statement here when he says that, I quote, he says, so my teacher gave me this example. And this example, he says, has stayed in my mind till date. And then he goes on to say that this is where, again, some of the changes which come. He says, my teacher told me that deen or mazhab, sect, and then he goes off on a tangent and he says, today, there are those who say that we don't have mazhab, we don't have sect. These people are living in a utopian world. Okay, these are not ground realities on the ground. On the ground, we are sects, we are divided in sects, we have to accept these realities. And then he says, and we have to deal with them. And then he says, and yes, when we reach the utopian age, where we don't have sects at all, then yes, almost, and then we can say all Muslims are one sect, and there is no sect anymore, but we are living in a time where we are divided big time, and we have to accept that, okay.
My teacher told me that deen, or I would call madhab today, those who say that we don't have madhab and we don't have sects, these people are living in a utopian world. Okay, these are not realities on the ground. On the ground, we are sects.
So what I want you to ponder over is the straw man. Look at the straw man here. Shaykh says, today, those who say that we don't have mazhab and we don't have sects. My question to Shaykh is, can he tell us who these people are? Is there anyone in the Muslim Ummah who says that we don't have mazhab in this Ummah, we don't have sects in this Ummah? MashaAllah, we are all Muslims, there is no Shia, there is no Sunni, there is no sect in this Ummah. The sects are non-existent. Who are these people that he's talking about, and who he's trying to refute by saying, no, sects are there, sects are a ground reality? He's refuting a straw man, an imaginary group, because the reality is that there is no one in the Ummah who says there are no sects in the Ummah today. Any person who says this would have to be completely deluded and disconnected with reality. So when he proceeds to refute this straw man by saying, on the ground, we are sects, we are divided in sects, we have to accept these realities and deal with it. Who denies this? And why is the Shaykh refuting non-existing straw mans? It's mind-boggling how he can confuse and conflate between the da'wah of those who are calling towards the fact that there should ideally be no sects in the ummah, because the Prophet ﷺ left us as one ummah, he left us as Muslims, and at the time he left us, there were no sects, even though there were political differences among the Muslims. Some Muslims were supporting a particular candidate for Khilafah after the Prophet, other Muslims were supporting someone else, but they didn't break their brotherhood over this. They did not divide and get separated from each other over this. They remained part of the same community, they were buried in the same graveyards, they prayed in the same masjid, everything they were one community. So if someone says that we should be like that community, we should be like the people of the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the people immediately after him, in the sense that they were one community, even when they disagreed. Imam Ali alayhi salam had political disagreements, but he still remained firmly part of the community. He did not go to some other place and start his own sect and isolate himself from the rest of the ummah. Rather, he remained part and parcel of the ummah. And so, if someone is calling towards Muslims today, returning back to that mindset whereby we say that, look, we can differ about our politics, we can differ about our readings of history. Okay, you can support a certain candidate, I can support some other candidate, but this doesn't mean we should have separate masajid. This doesn't mean we should have separate community centers. This shouldn't mean we should be at loggerheads with each other. This doesn't mean we should be enemies and we should do takfir of each other or call each other deviant over this. Baba, you like your candidate, I like my candidate. Let's agree to disagree over this, but let's not form sects around this. So in any case, it's mind-boggling how the Shaykh confuses and conflates between the da'wah of those who say that we shouldn't contribute to sectarianism, we shouldn't have a sectarian mindset, we should not form sects, and we should not be part of sects, right? Someone who is describing this as a Quranic vision, that this is the vision of the Quran, that we should not, Allah in the Quran says, don't break away into sects. Just as he says, do not commit adultery, do not drink alcohol, do not commit murder. He also gives the command, do not, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ تَفَرَّقُوا. Do not be like those who divided their religion and split up into sects. Now, Shaykh is saying that these people are living in some kind of utopia, or you're confusing two things. This is like someone comes in the ummah, a Shaykh comes on the mimbar and says, look, in our ummah, there should be no alcoholism, there should be no drugs, there should be no zina, there should be no murders. And you immediately accuse that Shaykh and say, oh, Shaykh, you are a utopian, you're living in some cave. The reality is that there is zina happening in this ummah, wal-iyadhu billah. There is murder happening, there is alcoholism, there is drugs. Baba, who is denying that there is all of this? We are not saying that there isn't all of this in this ummah. We are saying there shouldn't be, according to the Quran. And we are right in this. In the same way, when any sincere Muslim da'i says that, look, there shouldn't be sects in this ummah, they're not saying that there aren't sects in this ummah. They're saying, ideally, there shouldn't be sects. We shouldn't be sectarian minded. We should think at the level of the ummah. We shouldn't think in narrow sectarian sense, as so many people unfortunately do today. So, yeah, unfortunately, this is a straw man, and I don't see why Shaykh exerted his energy trying to refute it. And then the Shaykh goes on to say that, so my teacher used to give this example. He says mazhab or deen is like a shelter, and if you want to reform, you need to clarify which part of the deen do you want to reform. If you say no, you want to reform the whole madhab, then you are dropping the whole shelter, and then you need to give another shelter, otherwise this guy will fall down. Okay, and this is one of my biggest issues with reform, that we go into reform, we are breaking, but we don't give alternative solutions. Rather, we don't chart out what do we want. So again, coming to Islaah, they're proposing that there are no sects. Beautiful. He says the Quran says he named you Muslims. Accepted that Allah doesn't encourage sects. Not only does he, I would add sidebar, not only does he not encourage, he forbids. Let's not forget, he forbids. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold fast to the rope of Allah and don't break away into sects. So this is not just something Allah doesn't encourage. He forbids, actively forbids, just like he forbade zina, just as he forbade murder, just as he forbade shirk, just as he forbade all the other major sins, he forbade breaking away into sects. And so all those of us who are card-carrying members of a sect, one of the biggest questions we have to answer Allah on the Day of Judgment, if we die having paid allegiance to a sect, is we have to answer Allah on the Day of Judgment when He asks us and says, I said, La tafarraqu, don't break into sects. Why did you break into sects? Why did you get divided? We have to think, what will we respond? And so our solution is to say, Ya Allah, we studied how the sects formed, and we found out that they all formed by adding stuff to your deen. Everywhere, left, right, and center, Muslims fought with each other. Every time they fought over something, they said, each side said, okay, this is my position. The other side said, this is my position. They said, we are putting this inside the deen now, and if you don't accept it, you are kafir. The other side said, we are putting our position into the deen now, and if you don't accept it, you are kafir. Or at the very least, you are a zindiq, you are a deviant, you are this, you are that. So once we discovered this, we said, Ya Allah, we bypass all of these sectarian debates and quarrels, and we go back to the deen of the time of the Prophet. That is the deen that was approved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was the deen that was not divided into sects. So we renounce all these sectarian additions to the deen, and we end up with the deen that you laid out in the Quran, the aqidah that you gave us in the Quran, and what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam left this ummah upon. Simple.
But not that you start damaging things here without coming with an alternate proposal.
So we have already clarified what the alternative is. Return back to the Quran. Quran is giving you an aqidah that everyone in the ummah accepts, and that everyone in the ummah can unite around, which is belief in Allah, His angels, His messengers, His scriptures, last and final day of judgment. This is Iman and this is Islam. You accept it, you are our brother. You reject any of these, then you can be our brother in humanity, but not our brother in faith. Simple. This is given in the Quran. And once you adopt this, sectarianism is already in the dustbin. You know why? Because now everyone is my brother. I cannot expel or excommunicate the Sunni, because the Sunni believes in Allah and the messengers and the angels and the scriptures and the last and final day of judgment. So Sunni is my brother in faith and in Iman. And the 12 or Imami Shia also accepts all of these, so he's also my brother now. And then the Zaydi Shia, he also accepts all of these, so he's also my brother now. And the Ibadi also accepts this, so he's also my brother now. And the Salafi also, we are all brothers if we follow the simple formula of the Quran. But the moment you say, no, we have to accept these 5, but then I want to go to the sectarian corpus and bring things and add. Then Baba, every sect has their corpus. Every sect is going to bring a hadith from their corpus, add it to the deen. If you don't accept it, ya Allah, you are kafir. The result will be that if we accept the Sunni corpus, only Sunnis will remain Muslims. If we accept the 12 Imami corpus, only 12 Imamis will remain Muslims. The rest are all kuffar, mitata kufrin wa nifaq. They will die a death of jahiliyyah, as the narrations explicitly state.
Having denied the existence of the Imam of my time, man mata la ya'rifu imam zamanihi, mata mitatan jahiliyyah. Imam al-Sadiq says, mitata kufrin wa nifaq. A death of disbelief and hypocrisy.
If we accept the Ibadi corpus, then the whole ummah is going to hell. Wal-iyadhu billah, including the Muhajirin and Ansar who fought with Imam Ali alayhi salam. You will end up with a messed up belief. So this is why the right thing to do is to bypass all of this sectarian baggage, go to the clarity and certainty that the Quran gives you, embrace that aqidah, and then in the rest of the matters, you can have your own reading of history, no problem. Don't impose it on others. You can call towards your reading of history, but you can't expect every Muslim in the ummah to buy it or accept it. You can present it. If it convinces them, let them accept it. If it doesn't convince them, let them have their own reading of history. If there are problematic aspects in it, we can warn them about it, and we will warn them about it, no problem. But we don't break brotherhood over historical matters. Ya akhi, it does not make sense. Let's learn. This is something that, wal-iyadhu billah, it really feels bad that we have to say this, but wallahi, the non-Muslims are doing better than us on this. I mean, this is an area where Muslims can learn from non-Muslims because of how poorly we have performed. Look at the Americans. You think Americans are all 100% united on everything? They see eye to eye with each other on everything? No, they have very vast political differences. You have Republicans, you have Democrats, you have this, you have that. And throughout the year, you will find them fighting and bickering and arguing with each other and having debates. But when it comes to an issue that affects America as a whole, they are one nation. They unite. And at that time, let's say when an American, for example, is arrested unlawfully or something is done to him abroad, The government doesn't ask, who is he? Is he a Democrat? Is he a Republican? Who did he vote for in the last? No. The government will act in his interest, regardless of what his politics is. And it's just not America. Many other countries are like this. But unfortunately, we today in the Muslim Ummah, we have the sectarian mindset, which is that if something happens to a Muslim, you first ask, which sect is he? Oh, he's from the, he's a zindiq, he's a deviant, I don't care. And you're calling him a zindiq over what? Or differences in politics, or differences in reading of history, which even the Sahaba had. So isn't this crazy? Isn't this mad? In any case, we have amply clarified what the alternative is. We have said that we need to return to the Islam of the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Muslim community wasn't divided into sects. Even after the Prophet ﷺ, Muslims had political differences among themselves, but they didn't form sects around these differences. Did Imam Ali alayhi salam not have political differences with various Muslim rulers of his time? But did he split away from the Ummah to form a rival sect? No. He remained part and parcel of the same Ummah and the same community as his opposition. This is the alternative we are offering the Muslims of today. And this is what we are inviting them towards. You can have your different readings in politics, in history, even in jurisprudence, no problem. In the Zanniyat, difference of opinion is there, and sometimes no one knows for certainty what the Prophet precisely did in some of the nitty-gritties. No problem. In those areas, we can agree to disagree and follow whatever transmissions we have confidence in. But as far as Aqidah is concerned, the Quran has already united us as an ummah with a common faith and iman-based belief system. The problem is that the sects have tried to add sectarian baggage to it. We say, check out that sectarian baggage and don't treat it like it's deen. And in the rest of the issues, such as political and historical readings, every Muslim should be free to have his preferred reading of history, so long as he does not insert it into the deen and make it part of the deen, so long as he does not make or break brotherhood of iman over it, it should be fine. And every Muslim should be free to promote and argue for their preferred version of history, and even critique and reject other people's versions without it affecting the brotherhood of faith. This is what we call towards. So these are some of the main concerns that we had with Shaykh. Another concern that we had, and inshallah we'll be discussing this in more detail, is, for instance, Shaykh's failure to define reform before critiquing it. This is a big critical mistake that he made in this lecture, whereby he ended up lumping two very separate, distinct, and disparate intellectual trends into one category of reform. Okay, so in the same lecture, he talks about Abdul Karim Soroush, okay, someone whom he himself claims has ended up rejecting the divine origins of the Quran. The man believes this Quran is just, wal-'iyadhu billah, a collection of prophetic dreams. Wal-'iyadhu billah. So he's saying this is one end of the spectrum as far as reform is concerned. And in that same spectrum, he's placing al-Islaah and saying, well, this is also reform. This is a critical mistake. Because these two trends are so different and so mutually opposing to each other that if you're going to classify him as a kind of reform, then it means you clearly don't have a clear picture of what reform is. Because what these liberal, secular pseudo-reformists, or deformists as they ought to be called, because these people don't want to return back to the Islam of the Prophet. These people want to reinvent a new deen that will be in line with modern, liberal, secular values. So they want to invent a new deen. They don't want to reform the deviations from the original deen. So if you're going to call them reformers, then we are not reformers and we are anti-reform. If they are reformers, then we are anti-reform. Aslan, you cannot even include us among the reformists or the reformers then. Because if this is how loosely and how unacademically and unobjectively you're going to define reform, then you can't even talk about us in that lecture, because this reform is deform. Okay, and so to speak about Abdul Karim Soroush and these other liberal, secular, radical reformists in the same breath as you talk about an institution or a platform like Islaah, which is seriously and sincerely committed to strengthening the foundational pillars of the faith and returning back to the Islam of the time of the Prophet. If you're going to lump all of these together, then this is just like someone tries to give a presentation, for example, on self-defense, and then they want to give legitimate examples of it, and they start bringing the Zionist operations in Gaza, and they try to cite that as an example of legitimate self-defense. At that point, I think any right-minded person will say that, look, international law recognizes the right to self-defense, but this cannot be classified as self-defense. This is taking it too far. You are stretching the elasticity of the term to breaking point. And it's interesting because the Sheikh himself observed that some Western academics themselves, I think he was quoting Professor Charles Kurzman, who has said that the term reform has been applied to such different and mutually opposing trends that the term has become virtually meaningless. So despite quoting this professor, the Sheikh then proceeds to talk about Abdul Karim Soroush in the same breath as he talks about Al-Islah. So then that means the reform that you are critiquing is meaningless. You don't even have a proper understanding and a proper definition of reform. And this is why I say that this is a critical flaw in the lecture, that the Sheikh proceeded to advance critiques left, right, and center. He wanted to critique reform and reformers and reformist movements, but he did not even give a definition of reform. What is reform? And what is it supposed to be geared towards? And so obviously, when you don't have a clear conception of reform, you don't have a clear definition, then anyone who self-identifies as a reformer will be someone that you will then have to deal with. And you will have to say, okay, this is also a legitimate case of reform, so let us critique it, and you'll end up wasting your energy critiquing things that don't even deserve to be critiqued and that don't deserve any attention at all. At least not under the category of reform, they don't. So before you critique reform, you have to make up your mind. What is reform? Okay. If you believe Abdul Karim Soroush and these people who are calling, you have a lot, not Abdul Karim Soroush is not alone. There are so many others, these liberal feminists. Okay. And these radical liberal people who are coming and trying to cancel things in Islam, left, right, and center. There's so many people who want to abrogate and abolish things in Islam that have basis in the Quran, basis in the Sunnah, but they want to reinvent the deen and make it something that's palatable to Western modernity and Western tastes. So if you're going to accept these people as reformers, then we are not reformers. Then we are washing hands of reform. We don't call this reform then. And we are not reformers in this sense then. We are anti-reform, and then we are, and in compared to them, we are super traditional. So you need to have a clear, you need to delineate and distinguish between these things, not lump them together in one category, and then pass general statements, about them. This is another key flaw in the lecture, is that after lumping us all into the same category, he then proceeds to pass collective judgments about us as if we are all one and the same. And this results in unfair generalizations. And even the evidence, for example, that he then ends up giving is such that it does not match, it does not fit. And it does not support the case that he's trying to make. So, for example, he highlights this particular article, familiarity with the tradition, a prerequisite for reform. And then he proceeds to quote Professor Dr. Hassan Ansari, the message that he sent to the representatives of contemporary religious enlightened thinkers. And he quoted point number 2 here, which is that the second issue many proponents of religious enlightenment have is intellectual poverty in historiography. Okay, a lot of new ijtihad efforts and reformed ideas in matters of the Sharia, theology, legal theory, and particular jurisprudential matters require extensive historical research, and this requires expertise in history and historical sources. Unfortunately, even in this aspect, religious enlightenment thinkers have not done enough work. A lot of the opinions they express in matters of religion are not dependent on serious historical research in the field of Islam and Tashayyu'. Due to this, a lot of their theoretical reflections, at least of many of these figures, are reduced to the level of transient, superficial, and ineffective solutions. But who is he saying this about? He's saying this about Iranian reformists, the Shabistaris and the Sorushis and these kinds of people. So this is completely separate and different to the kind of revival that we are talking about, the kind of attempts that we are calling towards to go back to the Islam of the Prophet ﷺ and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, which they were upon in their time. But unfortunately, when you cast such a wide net that your idea of a reformer is someone who is calling for the abrogation and cancellation of the deen, he's also a reformer, and someone who wants to strengthen the actual deen by eliminating all the ghulu that has permeated it, he is also a reformer. When this is also a reformer and this is also a reformer, and then you start giving generalized statements about both, or you start taking statements that have been made about the other type of, pseudo-reformers or deformers, and you try to apply them on serious people who have actually done the extensive historical research and who do not reject anything until they have thoroughly done their homework, then you end up making unfair generalizations and unfair accusations. But that being said, and be that as it may, once again, I am saying all of this while fully assuring the Shaykh that we are still, despite the fact that we feel that many of the points that he has made are invalid, many of the criticisms he has made are without grounds, and inshallah, I will now go into greater detail. I'll deal with each criticism, each accusation, go through it, and then bring you the evidence from the sources that supports our position on it. But before I do that, and as I end this particular segment, let me once again reassure the Shaykh that despite everything that he has said in that lecture, we have not taken anything in it personally. Even the unfair and false accusations or slanderous accusations, we forgive him for that, and they do not in any way affect our outlook and our approach towards him. But yes, because he was very frank and honest in his criticisms, he was straightforward, and he did not mince words as he went on in that lecture. We also will then respond to these criticisms frankly and honestly without mincing any words. And where we feel that our dear Shaykh has made an unfair point or a technically unsound point or a slanderous accusation, we will let him know, again with the assurance that we have not taken it personally and we're not angry or upset with him, but just so that he should know. Okay, because he's raising these criticisms and he's saying that I'm doing it sincerely and I mean well, so we owe it to him to let him know where he has got it wrong and why we disagree with the points that he has raised. And inshallah, we will do this in the upcoming segments, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala.